What's up, investors? It's the Russian dude. A significant decision that will impact the lives of millions has been quietly taken by Putin. Typically, when monumental changes do happen, we expect formal announcements, such as presidential addresses broadcasted across major networks, accompanied by extensive media coverage and public discussions. Unless such decisions are something that the people of Russia will not like. And Putin knows it. The particular decision we're talking about is the dramatic decrease of the war-related payments in some areas by as much as 30 times. Of course, Putin would want to quietly mention it once sometime around 4 a.m. news, hoping that not too many people will notice, but bad news spread fast. That's why his attempt to hide the truth has failed miserably. The truth that the military budget is depleting extremely fast and there's simply not much money left, making the continuation of the invasion barely sustainable. Because previously, war money was the priority for Putin. He was, and still is, ready to sacrifice other sectors of the economy and industries in order to keep fueling the ongoing war. But now, it looks like there is nothing left to sacrifice besides the war itself. The Russian propaganda is not just an absolute master of creating the external enemy out of nowhere and making the people of Russia hating it for no reason, but it also does a relatively good job at delivering the bad news. They will obviously do everything possible to make sure that as few people as possible hear the news, because in the end, they do have some sort of journalistic accountability, so that in the end people will not question them asking why they were never informed. And one of the ways of hiding the harsh truth, besides talking about it during the least popular media times and hours, is also by trying to overshadow bad news with glorious and victorious ones. Something like, we did lose 1,000 soldiers yesterday, but at least we took Bakhmut, the pivotal city in the intersection of major highways which opens the roads in all different directions across Donbass region. You see how it works. By the time they finish presenting the news, most people already forget about 4-digit losses. Long story short, attention is often diverted to grand announcements that may not impose immediate obligations or limitations. While the entire country discusses topics like the new nuclear doctrines, for example, which most likely will never be even implemented, substantial changes with direct consequences have been quietly implemented behind the facade of newsworthy events. A very interesting and unusual example happened just recently, which involved the Mosfilm studio, the biggest Russian movie producing company. Karen Shaksanazarov, the chairman of this government-owned entity, met with President Vladimir Putin. Media outlets widely reported his appeal to lift restrictions on YouTube, highlighting concerns about cultural exchange and digital platforms. And yes, this was the central attention of the Russian media for several days. YouTube is huge, it goes without saying, but it barely works inside Russia, so yes, people do talk about it all the time. However, less prominently featured was his statement that Mosfilm has also provided 50 units of military equipment to the Russian army, including 8 PT-76 amphibious tanks and 28 T-55 tanks. These tanks are not modern by any means. The PT-76, for example, entered the series in 1952, and the T-55s began production in 1958. These models have held significant roles in Soviet-era films, movies, sometimes portraying foreign military forces. And yes, you heard it right. Movie-making companies literally donated their inventory that they used to film with. Tanks, other military machines that were barely working decorations or background items, are now being used by the Russian soldiers along the front lines. One problem is that these things are almost 70 years old. Another problem is that they were stripped of their combat features entirely due to safety. I mean, you obviously don't want for a tank to accidentally shoot actors on the set. The repurposing from cinematic props to active military equipment suggests challenges within the military supply chain, possibly indicating shortages of current resources. The reliance on such vintage machinery raises questions about preparedness and resource allocation, highlighting potential budgetary constraints affecting military capabilities. This was one of the earliest, not obvious at first, signs that the military budget of Russia experiences some difficulties and the military machine is stalling. Recently, state media announced what appeared to be positive news: an increase in compensation for servicemen injured in the line of duty. Previously, any injury sustained during service warranted a uniform compensation of 3 million rubles, regardless of the severity. The new policy increased the amount to 4 million rubles for injuries resulting in disability. At first glance, this seems like a generous gesture towards those who have sacrificed for the nation. Media outlets praised the decision, emphasizing the leadership's commitment to supporting wounded servicemen. However, a closer examination reveals that in addition to this increase, the government has introduced significant changes that effectively reduce compensation for many. The uniform compensation has been replaced with a differentiated system. Only those with severe injuries resulting in recognized disability qualify for increased payment. So-called minor wounds, according to a very specific government index, now receive a reduced compensation of only 1 million rubles, already a decrease of 2 million, approximately $19,000, which will apply to a vast majority of Russian soldiers. And then, injuries that are not listed in the official documents may result in a payment as low as only 100,000 rubles, the reduction of 30 times from the original 3 million ruble payments. For almost any injury you can show and prove that you received in the zone of the special military operation. And proving it was a completely different challenge, as you can imagine. So, what do we get? The headline news mentioned 4 million rubles as new compensation for injured soldiers. Everyone is happy. Everyone thinks that the government cares about them and they have a lot of money. But in reality, very few will qualify for the full payment. Not too many will qualify for 1 million rubles payment, and the majority, even though it will still require extensive paperwork, will only receive 100,000. Both of these categories were eligible for 3 million just less than a month ago. This adjustment has substantial implications. During recovery period, servicemen do not receive their standard salaries, which were highlighted in military contract advertisements as being approximately around 200,000 rubles per month, a little bit under $2,000. And of course, there was a small text on page 96, paragraph X, subsection 3.5, line A, so not too many people saw it when signing the contract. As a result, they receive a significantly smaller allowance, if any at all. With the reduction in these payments, many wounded servicemen and their families may face financial hardships, adding stress to an already challenging situation. The huge sign-up bonuses are spent as down payments for houses and cars, expecting that a monthly salary of a soldier will cover these monthly payments. So, when inevitably most of them end up in the hospital injured, these payments are no longer distributed. There have also been reports of difficulties faced by servicemen in receiving their entitled compensation. In some cases, particularly within certain units, wounded soldiers have been denied official documentation proving their injuries, complicating their ability to claim the benefits. Allegations suggest that some individuals are left without adequate medical care at all, or are prematurely returned to active duty, potentially endangering their health and well-being, and also the well-being of their comrades they're serving side by side. In addition to changes in compensation, the parliament has introduced measures holding servicemen responsible for damaged or lost military equipment. Traditionally, soldiers and officers are accountable for the equipment assigned to them, ranging from personal gear to vehicles. In peacetime, incidents such as, for example, a trained pilot damaging an aircraft during training could result in disciplinary action and potentially financial liability, sometimes with severe, also personal consequences. Aircrafts obviously are expensive, and seemingly a minor damage to the wing control system can result in millions of rubles in repairs that a pilot trainee will most certainly not have. And in the context of active conflict, this accountability places immense pressure on servicemen. The unpredictable conditions of war increase the likelihood of equipment loss or damage due to factors beyond individual control. I mean, it's a war. 1 minute you boil water for some tea, the next minute you are under attack by an ambushing enemy. They will obviously try to sabotage the equipment as well, destroy artillery systems and steal tanks. And since soldiers are now personally responsible for such losses, these are no longer millions of rubles we're talking about, these are now hundreds of millions. So now imagine, pretty much every soldier is concerned about surviving every living minute of the day, for as long as he is obviously in the active combat zone. And previously, if there was an immediate danger, a soldier could have simply abandoned everything and just retreat. Now, in addition to constantly trying to think of ways to survive, soldiers will also have to think about protecting the equipment as well. If a tank gets stuck in a ditch, as usually many times it happened in the past, it can no longer be simply abandoned, and a 50-ton machine will need to be rescued, most likely by digging around the ditch with these small personal soldier shovels. All in the meantime while being under constant surveillance by the enemy's drones, expecting the attack literally any second. At this point, the biggest reason why so many Russian soldiers went to Ukraine to take money, completely loses the relevance. Life itself, as well as the financial stability, are now both in a grave danger. These policies now also extend to paramilitary groups and volunteer units. While these groups operate in a complex legal space, they are now being held financially responsible for government-issued equipment as well. This creates legal ambiguities, as the formal recognition and regulation of such groups are not clearly defined within existing legislation. The government will do everything possible to find anyone responsible for a loss and get their money back, just the same as they'll do everything possible to find any loopholes inside their own rules and laws not to pay the owed money. Are there any more reasons to fight for the Russian soldiers then? What will be their motivation to press forward in another meat assault? These are some very good questions. These policy changes suggest a shift in how military personnel are supported and managed. The reduction in benefits for wounded servicemen and the increased financial responsibilities for equipment most likely reveals huge problems within the system, including budget constraints and resource management issues. For the first time in recent years, there is a noticeable decrease in benefits for those participating in active military operations. This development will have significant implications for morale and recruitment. As mentioned previously, Russians, even the most desperate ones, will lose any motivation to trade their lives for a probability to get paid. Criticism of these changes has emerged from various channels, including military commentators and bloggers who traditionally support the armed forces. Their disagreement highlights the potential for these policies to affect not only servicemen, but also public perception and trust in military initiatives. At this point, it is not a rocket science to sum 1 + 1 to get 2, because the signs are there. The propaganda tried to hide it, but they couldn't. Bad news travel fast once again, and this time the bad news is that there is not that much money left to be spent on war. The taxes have already increased. The money printing to cover the war efforts increased the inflation to double digits. Every sector of the economy lost something in order to support Putin's invasion, and it was still not enough. The most sacred people to Putin, his soldiers, are next in line for the inevitable shortages and limitations, and the invasion becomes increasingly unsustainable. And after there is no more incentives for people to sacrifice their lives for Putin, who is going to be there left fighting his war? Well, there you have it, guys. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe to my channel. If you wish to support my work, there are links down below. Thanks so much for watching. See you tomorrow.
We won't succumb to their tricks, the facade they try to sell. Their twisted words and feeble claims are all they cannot quell. We see through their lies, their feeble attempts to sway.